So, unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably heard by now that the coaching carousel is it's still in full effect, and the Auburn head coaching job is now vacant, as Hugh Freeze does get fired. So, I will be on here talking about a few candidates that I think could be good replacements for the job. I'm going to give you some wild cards. I'm going to give you some that you're not going to like. I'm going to give you some that might not happen. Pretty much everything. We're going to give you some realistic options, some unrealistic options, and just some wild cards because you really never know. So, um, if you enjoy this video, once you get to the end, please like and subscribe because this is a new channel and we are going to be really going insane on here up until the new year because honestly, this is my favorite type of content. Since I was a kid, I've really wanted to do some sports media type of content. So, is it going to be the most in depth? Probably not because I'm no expert. I'm just here to have fun and connect with some cool people inside the sports world. So, if you relate to me at all, like, subscribe, and hey, maybe I want to get some of you guys on and get some of your opinions as well on some future topics that we'll discuss. So we're just gonna hop straight into this. The first name on here, I believe right now is the betting favorite to get the job. Actually, it may have changed to another name that I'm going to mention later, which I honestly do think is the most credible and best fit. But here's one that I would really like, but there's another job open that could be very intriguing to him, and that is John Summerall. So he's been great at Tulane. We know that. I mean, he's won at Tulane. Um, he's going to be coaching in the SEC regardless. You know, there were some rumors about him coaching at Kentucky. There were some rumors about him coaching at Arkansas. You know, really, pretty much all of these open jobs. Even Penn State got some word about this, and the other one is LSU because he is already right there, pretty much in Louisiana, or maybe in Louisiana, but in that area anyway. So, that's if the Kentucky seat opens, by the way. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. But he did play linebacker at Kentucky, so that's another reason that I think that the Kentucky job would be a very good fit for him, and I do think he would take it because we've seen a lot of coaches recently go to their alma mater, coach at their alma mater, and then maybe not want to leave. The latest being Brent Key. I mean, I saw some reports today saying that Georgia Tech's already looking to extend him. He was heavily rumored for all of these jobs, mainly being Penn State. That one was super high on the Brent Key list. So yeah, it looks like he'll be back at Georgia Tech, but nothing's confirmed. They even spoke to him in an interview about it. He said, "Cut me open, see what colors I bleed." Pretty much saying, "I'm Georgia Tech no matter what. I'm sticking to my alma mater." But anyways, back to John Summerall. 23-4 at Troy through his 2 years. He did win a Sun Belt championship there. He got him to another Sun Belt championship and had him ranked top 25 in the AP poll, which I believe was the first time in program history. Could be wrong on that. Um, like I said, he took him to two Sun Belt championships, won one, and he's been winning at Tulane. So I think he would be a very good fit for this job. And like I said, he's going to be coaching in the SEC. Yeah, there are some concerns as to will he be able to succeed in the SEC? Well, he succeeded. I know it's a major difference. You're talking group of five, and now we're talking SEC. And it's not a mid-pack SEC job at all, I'd say. I think Auburn is a very good job, and I think a lot of people are kind of speaking down on it more than what they should be. Another one, um, I think this is the favorite to get the job. If this hire is made and I'm an Auburn fan, I'm not an Auburn fan, but I'm saying if I were, and this Auburn or this hire was made, I would be stoked. And that is Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. First off, he has Auburn ties already. He was Bo Nix's offensive coordinator back in 2019 when Bo Nix was a freshman. So let's just talk about what he's done with Arizona State. 2024, he completely flips the program around. 11-3 season after I can't remember exactly what the record was before that, but it was pretty bad. It may have been like one or two wins. Undefeated at home that year. He got them to the Big 12 championship game, took them to the college football playoffs last year, and nearly knocked off Texas in overtime. Pretty sure a lot of you remember that as the massive Cam Scatterbo game or Cam Scatterbo game. I know he's getting a lot of hype with the Giants right now, although he did go down with a brutal injury. But yeah, they nearly knocked off Texas, and there were some controversial calls in that game that could have potentially swayed Arizona State's way, and they could have pulled off the upset. But it was an absolute dogfight. This year he's 6-3 with a win over Texas Tech, which is number one or two. I think they're number two in the Big 12. Which tomorrow they go to face Brigham Young. Um, so that's going to be very intriguing for especially the Big 12 aspirations and college football playoff aspirations. But keep in mind this year, don't look at that 6-3 record as a bad thing because this team has been banged up. They've probably been the most injured team in college football this year, including their starting quarterback went down, and they're still going out there and beating good teams without their starting quarterback. He's still winning games. This guy brings studs into your programs like Cam Scatabo. Look at what he's done with Sam Levitt, Jordan Tyson. He's one of the better receivers in the whole country right now, and just more dudes. Um, Now look at what he's done at Arizona State, which is not. It was never a highly touted program, and they give him Auburn's resources, and then let me know what he does. Because I think once you give this guy some more resources, he's gonna be dangerous. He's gonna be dangerous. I'm really that big on Kenny Dillingham. When the name first started getting floated around, I wasn't massive on it. I really sat there and I started to think this could be big for Auburn. Because Auburn is not a bad recruiting spot. Yeah, you get a lot of recruits stolen from Alabama because it's Alabama and you're in the same state as them, but look at their past history with Cam Newton. They've won national championships and fairly recently too. This is not by any means a bad job, like I've said. So Auburn's recruiting, Auburn's environment, their resources, Kenny Dillingham could potentially, I think he could thrive there. Another one, which is probably not going to happen, but I wouldn't fully count it out, is Jimbo Fisher. I know if you're an Auburn fan, I would probably be pretty mad at me saying that. But he has ties to the program. He's had ties to the program forever. He has support from a lot of people inside the program as well. A lot of people inside that program want him back at Auburn. Not saying the fans do, but there are a lot of insiders in that program that I've heard. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've heard a lot of sources say it. They wouldn't mind having Jimbo Fisher back. Um, but in my opinion, it almost just feels like buying a more expensive version of Hugh Freeze, who you just fired. You can recruit good players. You can get the 5 stars in here. You have good resources to bring those 5 stars in here. But are you going to develop this talent? Are you going to win with this talent? Just keep that there. Another one is James Franklin. James Franklin is a great coach, and I'm a Penn State fan. I I think it was just mute. It was time for a split. It was time for a change. You know, he couldn't get past the two big programs in the Big Ten Conference, being Ohio State and being Michigan. It got to a point where you kind of you needed a change in that Penn State program. The reason James Franklin was fired was not because James Franklin is a bad coach. There is a reason that all of these job openings are still mentioning James Franklin, although he just got fired from a big program such as Penn State. He came in and changed that Penn State program, flipped it upside down out of a bad situation too. He's like I said, he's a good coach. He can flip your program around. Offensive struggles were always an issue at Penn State, though. He would bring a great defensive staff. Penn State always had a good defense under James Franklin for the most part, other than this year. But there are some you could have some conversations about that one. Um, but the offensive struggles were always real. Even Andy Kotelnicki, he brought him over from Kansas to Penn State, and it just hasn't been good. It just has not been good. It wasn't as bad last year, but it still wasn't great. and it's been pretty bad this year. Although you did lose your starting quarterback, even before that, it was just bad. So if you bring in James Franklin to coach your team, especially being in the SEC, the staffing that he hires is a question. It's not that he's a bad coach, it's the staff that he brings in. And when you're coaching the SEC or any Power Four conference at that, you have the staff that you bring in matters so much. It matters almost more than having a good head coach. If you can't run an offense in the SEC, you're probably not going to win. You know, how are you going to score points on these Georgia teams? Are you ever going to beat them? No, because you can't score points on them. Why did Penn State never beat Ohio State? They would hold Ohio State and Michigan to low points. The offense just couldn't score points. The James Franklin the James Franklin offense at Penn State was just never it was never there. So that is a concern for hiring James Franklin at Auburn. You know, now like I said, he couldn't beat Ohio State and couldn't beat Michigan. Now say he has to face Bama and Georgia year in and year out. That's very worrisome. Um, as I said, he couldn't beat the top teams. Versus the top 5 teams, he is 1-13. Versus AP top 10 teams, he is 3-18. Versus AP top 25 teams, he is 14-26. Versus Ohio State at Penn State, he is 1-9. Versus Michigan at Penn State, he is 3-7. So, how do we feel going up against Alabama and Georgia? And if Kiffin stays at Ole Miss, that program is on the rise if you even want to throw them in there. Even the Floridas and LSUs of the world, if they make the big hires that they're supposed to in this coaching cycle, then I just don't know if Franklin has what it takes to actually win games in the SEC. I think he's more of an ACC coach or just middle of the pack Big Ten coach. He couldn't ever get Penn State over the hump. Do you think he's going to get an Auburn team over the hump when you have other guys, other big dogs in the conference? Another one, which I think Florida's probably going to get this guy, is Eli Drinkwitz. He turned this Mizzou program around. He has a little bit of nerdy swag to him. He can recruit. And he could also develop these players that he recruits. We've seen that with Luther Burden. We've seen that with, I mean, Bo Beulah didn't look bad this year, and he brought him over from the transfer portal. Speaking of the transfer portal, he works very good in the transfer portal, which is big in this modern day college football era. You need to be able to use the transfer portal. Look at what Lane Kiffin does at Ole Miss. A lot of that team is the transfer portal players. Um, a big question is, will he leave Mizzou for Auburn when there is another job like Florida and another job like LSU and another job like Penn State, all probably out there offering them. I would assume that all these jobs are out there offering Eli Drinkwitz. So Auburn is competing against LSU, Florida, and probably Penn State. You could argue Penn State maybe being one below Auburn. I think they're about at even levels there. Although Auburn might be a little bit more of a draw because it is an SEC job and they do have some recent national championships. But Auburn seemingly having more resources and recruiting advantages than Mizzou, maybe he does. But like I said, I think Florida's going to be throwing a big bag at him. That is if Lane Kiffin doesn't leave Ole Miss, because if Lane Kiffin does leave Ole Miss, I think that's Florida's target there. Another one, if we want to go to the G5, is Alex Golesh. Just look at what he's done at USF. They just blew the doors off of UTSA again last night. I mean, they've just been blowing teams out nonstop. They went out, they beat Florida. So, Auburn being, like I said, I think the fourth best job open, it's going to be harder for them to make a big splash. So G5 could be in play here, and Golesh is one of the top G5 coaches in the coaching carousel. He has some SEC experience being the offensive coordinator at Tennessee. Even though he wasn't calling plays there, his offense was ranked number one in the AP poll at that time. It was also an explosive offense. I don't know how much he had to do with it, but obviously there was something to do with it because he was the coordinator. And I believe he was the run game coordinator or the pass game coordinator. I can't remember exactly what role it was. But look at what Hendon Hooker did with that. So that's been a big problem at Auburn. You could get the quarterback in, you could get the quarterback transfer to your program. Can you develop him? He didn't with Jackson Arnold. He didn't with Peyton Thorne. That's been a big problem is Auburn, they have the weapons around these quarterbacks. They just don't have the consistent quarterback play whatsoever that you would hope for in a big program like this. But Golesh, he's like I said, he's winning at USF right now. He recruits very well to be in the G5 as well. His second recruiting cycle at USF, it was the 48th ranked class nationally. That's beating out some Power 4 schools. He knocked off Florida this year in Gainesville. He walked into the swamp, knocked off Florida, when this team still had playoff aspirations. Although Billy Napier was the coach at the time, there was major playoff aspirations for this Florida program coming into the year. DJ Lagway and all these the freshman talent that they got too, some transfer portal guys. Like I said, that's a massive win for a G5 program. But he's had this USF squad ranked pretty much all year. And they're not just barely squeaking by these teams. They're blowing teams out. Like they're putting up 45, 50 points pretty much a game. Even against Boise State. They went in there and destroyed Boise State. Now, if you give him Auburn's resources, he's shown that he can run an offense. He can develop some offensive talent. Now just give him Auburn's resources. I guarantee you he can go in there and recruit, and I guarantee you he can go in there and win games. But he's another one. A lot of people are going to be offering him, and I believe Arkansas is very well in the mix here as well. Another one that I think a lot of people are going to hate is Dan Mullen. I haven't heard any talks about this, but he's had previous success in the SEC. I won't go too in depth on this one. Um, he's had success at both Florida and Mississippi State. He's a good offensive mind, um, but he seemed to never be able to get over the hump because one side of the ball was always good with him, and the other side was always questionable. You know, um, he's never had the consistent coaching on both sides of the ball as well as far as staffing goes. And like I was just saying, staffing is majorly important in college football and just the sport of football in general. So the stat, he took Florida to a New Year's Six Bowl. That New Year's Six Bowl in today's modern day college football, it would be a college football playoff spot. And I have no doubt that he can go in there and do the same thing with Auburn as to what he did with Florida. And even look at UNLV right now. They're putting up major offensive numbers, but yet again, like I said, their defense is letting them down. That's why they have two losses. You shouldn't be putting up 40, 50 points a game and lose the football game. That's just how it goes. And that's what that Florida team did when they went to the New Year's Six Bowl. You probably remember the SEC championship against Alabama that year. Florida put up about 40 points and still lost because this defense was non-existent. And that was a continuous challenge for Dan Mullen was can you staff the right guys to have a good offense and a good defense in the same year. Another one that it's a wild card, and I've not heard this at all, but it is a fun one, is John Gruden. This just feels like a strange Auburn move to me, kind of like the Hugh Freeze one. No, like I said, Auburn's had trouble with some quarterbacks. Great with quarterback development. I don't think you can argue that. He's won some Super Bowls with the Raiders. Players love him. He has his little Barstool show, so players they're probably going to be attracted to that. I believe that he would use NIL. I believe that he would be able to recruit a lot of these guys. I believe people would want to play for him, especially these younger kids coming out of high school. I think he could be great in the transfer portal too, and you'll see him develop some good quarterbacks at Auburn, which I think Auburn fans would love to see. Um, but would he be a fit in today's just football in general, just the game? I'm not saying the NIL era, but the game changes. This is in every sport. The game changes as coaches get older. They're not as good. You see it with Dabo Swinney right now. That's just how it goes. That's the name of the game. You have to pivot. Will he be able to pivot, being he hasn't coached in a while? But he has expressed wanting to come coach, specifically in the SEC. So that was a fun name. It's not going to happen. I'll go and tell you it's not going to happen. But interesting. Another one that I really like that I haven't really heard talked about for this job because I don't know if he would leave is Jed Fish. He's first off his stint at Arizona. He takes a program that went 1-11 to a 10-3 program the next year. He had him ranked number 11 in the AP poll. Now look at what he's doing in Washington with limited resources. I would say limited resources if you're comparing it to Auburn. I'm not saying that Washington fully has limited resources, but comparing it to Auburn, you would call those resources limited. They're 6-2 right now, with the only loss, or one of the only losses, being to Ohio State. There's not too much to say about it, but dude, I think he would. I think he would fit right in. But can he win games in the SEC? We don't know. That's a question with all of these. Another one is Will Steen, offensive coordinator at Oregon. He's done a great job with this Oregon offense. He maybe you don't want a coach that has had no head coaching experience. But we've seen this a lot in the past, really the last few years, the last decade, I'd say. Um, a lot of the top head coaches in the country come from those coordinator jobs, one being Dan Lanning, who he works under right now. Steen will get a head coaching job. I mean, I've been saying this for a long time that Will Steen will get a head coaching job. He's one of the better coordinators in the country and has worked well with quarterbacks throughout his years of being floated around with different staffs. Um, like I said, which a lot of Auburn fans will probably love to hear. 2023 and 2024 at Oregon, he did have one of the more explosive offenses in the country. This year, it completely flipped around Dante Moore's career because do you remember how bad that kid looked at UCLA? People completely wrote him off. Now he's a Heisman candidate at Oregon. Yeah, he has better players around him, but there's some developmental factors there too. It's not just the player. There's some coaching going on here too, and you could see it in Dante Moore's game. He just looks more comfortable than what he did at UCLA. He looks like a more complete player. He's getting a lot of buzz to go high up in the NFL draft. Some even saying he can go number one potentially. So, I mean, that's something that Auburn can very well consider. Another one is Clark Lee. First, I don't know if he leaves Vandy. It is his alma mater. He has spoken highly of Vanderbilt, and he said, I think that I could stay and get the resources to win at Vanderbilt. Um, he's being floated around heavily in these coaching carousel conversations. But in my opinion, I'm not really buying fully into it yet. I'm not saying he's a bad coach, but I will give you my reasons. What he's done at this Vanderbilt program has not gone unnoticed by anybody in the country. You know, he had this Vandy program to a spot I never thought I would see a Vandy program at because they're for years we said this is a baseball school. Now, Vandy is very much a football school right now with Diego Pavi. But Clark Lee has some factors in that, which goes against what I'm about to say. Um, he works well in the transfer portal. Went out and brought Diego Pavia, a lot of that New Mexico State staff. He has five-star recruits visiting right now. I mean, Jared Curtis was at the game the other day, a few weeks ago. I forgot what game it was, but Jared Curtis was at the game, the five-star quarterback, Georgia commit. They beat Alabama last year. But the only concern to me is in year one, he was 2-10. Yes, you can't take much away from year one because you're walking into a bad situation. You have to try and get out of it. It's tough to get out of that in 1 year. But then the next year, he goes 5-7. Yeah, there's some improvement. You start to see some upside. You start to believe a little bit. The next year, you're right back at 2-10. Or no, yeah, the next year, right back at 2-10. So year three, you're right back at 2-10. Then it's like, okay. Diego Pavia then comes in. Now they're 7-6. They're highly ranked in the AP poll right now, with only 2 losses on the season. Also beating some ranked opponents such as LSU, which is no longer ranked, but still, at the time they were ranked. Um, you know, one of the losses was to Bama. One of the losses was to Texas, which has looked better as of late. I just want to see a little bit more from Clark Lee because the stats that I just provided you, how much of this is Diego Pavia and the hype surrounding Diego Pavi? I think Diego Pavia is a good player. Has he played the greatest against these top-ranked teams? No, he hasn't. But he's still a major factor in this team. The team loves to play for him. So, how much of this is Clark Lee and how much is Diego Pavia? I do think I'm not saying he's a bad coach. I'm not saying that at all. Better than Hugh Freeze, I would say. He's done more at Vandy than what Hugh Freeze did at Auburn for what, 5 years, 4 years? You know, uh, but do I think it'd be a terrible hire? No. I just think there are better options out there if you're a program like Auburn. And I know Clark Lee has also been floated around a lot at Penn State as well. And also some of these other jobs, like even LSU, I've heard the name floated around. I don't think LSU will go that route. I think they'll make a bigger splash. But yeah. Um, what I can say though is, like I said, the work he's done in the transfer portal is great. And he's completely turned this Vanderbilt program upside down to a spot that they never thought they'd be in a good way. So that's some questions there. But yeah, better than Hugh Freeze, though, like I said. More resources to work with at Auburn, absolutely. So we'll see if that happens. Wouldn't be shocked. But yeah, that's just like I said, for those of you saying that Auburn's not a good job, just or even the Auburn fans that are kind of just down about, having no success as of late, I'd say, and I'm not meaning that in any bad way. Take the helmet off. Look at the logo that you're wearing on this helmet. This is a program worthy of national championships. This is a program with national championship expectations. You're going back to the Cam Newton days. Struggles developing quarterbacks since, especially with Freeze. So I'd say get an offensive minded head coach. But then again, we've also seen some defensive minded head coaches as of late hired that can develop an offense. So we'll see. It, like I said, really depends on the staff that you bring in. So that's just my intake on some potential candidates here.